At supper this night he talked of good eating with uncommon satisfaction. Some people, said Johnson, have a foolish way of not minding, or pretending not to mind, what they eat. For my part, I mind my belly very studiously and very carefully. For I look upon it that he who does not mind his belly will hardly mind anything else. He now appeared to me Jean Bull philosophe, and he was, for the moment, not only serious but vehement. Yet I have heard him, upon other occasions, talk with great contempt of people who were anxious to gratify their palates, and the 206th number of his Rambler is a masterly essay against gluttony, or here pronounced gulosity, which I suppose is the same thing, although I've never heard that word before. Gulosity. Gulosity. Gulosity? Anyway, his practice, indeed, I must acknowledge, may be considered as casting the balance of his different opinions upon this subject. For I never knew, typo there, I never knew any man who relished good eating more than he did. When at a table, he was totally absorbed in the business of the moment. His looks seemed riveted to his plate, nor would he, unless when in the very high company, say one word, or even pay the least attention to what was said by others, till he had satisfied his appetite, which was so fierce and indulged with such intenseness that while in the act of eating, the veins of his forehead swelled, and generally a strong perspiration was visible. Oh, this making me hungry, too. To those whose sensations were delicate, this could not but be disgusting, and it was doubtless not very suitable to the character of a philosopher, who should be distinguished by self-command. And, I don't know, I'm picturing something very funny here. Just like him, like, ah, ah. But it must be owned that Johnson, though he could be rigidly abstemious, and was not a temperate man either in eating or drinking, he could refrain, but he could not use moderately. So he could either not eat or eat a lot. He told me that he had fasted 2 days without inconvenience, and that he had never been hungry but once. They who beheld with wonder how much he ate upon all occasions when his dinner was to his taste could not easily conceive what he must have meant by hunger. And not only was he remarkable for his extraordinary quantity with which he ate, but he was, or affected to be, a man of very nice discernment in the science of cookery. He used to descant critically on the dishes which had been at table where he had dined or supped, and to recollect very minutely what he had liked. I remember, when he was in Scotland, his praising Gordon's pellets, a dish of pellets at the Honourable Alexander Gordon's, with a warmth of expression which might have done honour to more important subjects. As for Maclaron's imitation of a made dish, it was a wretched attempt, is what he said. He, about the same time, was so much displeased with the performances of a nobleman, a later footnote tells us perhaps it was Lord Ellenbeck, his French cook, that he'd exclaimed with vehemence, "I'd throw such a rascal into the river." And then he proceeded to alarm a lady, probably Mrs. Boswell, at whose house he was to sup, by the following manifesto of his skill. "I, madame, who live at a variety of good tables, am a much better judge of cookery than any person who has a very tolerable cook, but lives much at home. For his palate is gradually adapted to the taste of his cook, whereas, madame, in trying by a wider range, I can more exquisitely judge." When invited to dine, even with an intimate friend, he was not pleased if something better than a plain dinner was not prepared for him. I have heard him say on such an occasion, "This was a good dinner enough, to be sure, but it was not a dinner to ask a man to." I should use that phrase sometime. On the other hand, he was wont to express with great glee his satisfaction when he had been entertained quite to his mind. One day, when he had dined with his neighbor and landlord in Baltcourt, Mr. Allen, the printer, whose old housekeeper had studied his taste in everything, he pronounced this eulogy: "Sir, we could not have had a better dinner had there been a synod of cooks." This makes me hungry. While we were left by ourselves after the Dutchman had gone to bed, Dr. Johnson talked of the studied behavior which many have recommended and practiced. He disapproved of it, and said, "I never considered whether I should be a grave man or a merry man, but just let inclination for the time have its course." He flattered me with some hopes that he would, in the course of the following summer, come over to Holland and accompany me in a tour through the Netherlands. I teased him with fanciful apprehensions of his unhappiness. A moth having fluttered around the candle and burnt itself, he laid hold of this little incident to admonish me, saying, with a sly look and in a solemn but quiet tone, "That creature was its own tormentor, and I believe its name was Boswell." Next day we got to Harwich to dinner, and my passage in the packed boat to Helvoetsluys, Helvoetsluys, never heard of this place, being secured, and my baggage put on board, we dined at our inn by ourselves. I happened to say it would be terrible if he should not find a speedy opportunity of returning to London, and be confined to so dull a place. Johnson said, "Don't, sir, accustom yourself to use big words for little matters. It would not be terrible though I were to be detained some time here." The practice of using words to disproportionate magnitude is no doubt too frequent everywhere, but I think most remarkable among the French, of which all who have travelled in France must have been struck with innumerable instances. I don't know why Boswell's throwing the French under the bus there, but seems apropos of nothing. Anyway, we went and looked at the church, and having gone into it and walked up to the altar, Johnson, whose piety was constant and fervent, sent me to my knees, saying, "Now that you are going to leave your native country, recommend yourself to the protection of your Creator and Redeemer." Those are in caps, so that's why I'm screaming it. After we came out of the church, we stood talking for some time together of Bishop Berkeley's ingenious sophistry to prove the non-existence of matter, and that everything in the universe is merely ideal. I observed that though we are satisfied his doctrine is not true, it is impossible to refute it. I never shall forget the alacrity with which Johnson answered, striking his foot with mighty force against a large stone till he redoubted from it. "I refute it thus!" This was a stout exemplification of the first truths of Pierre Bourdieu, or the original principles of Reid and of Beattie, without admitting which we can no more argue in metaphysics than we can argue in mathematics without axioms. To me it is not conceivable how Berkeley can be answered by pure reasoning, but I know that the nice and difficult task was to have been undertaken by one of the most luminous minds of the present age, and that politics turned him from calm philosophy aside. What an admirable display of subtlety, united with brilliance, might his contending with Berkeley have afforded us. How must we, when we reflect on the loss of such an intellectual feast, regret that he should be characterized as the man, quote, whom born from the universes narrowed his mind, and to party gave up what was meant for mankind. My reverend friend walked down with me to the beach, where we embraced and parted with tenderness, and engaged to correspond by letters. I said, I hope, sir, you will not forget me in my absence. Johnson said, Nay, sir, it is more likely you should forget me than that I should forget you. Well, these guys need to get a room already, huh? As the vessel put out to sea, I kept my eyes upon him for a considerable time, while he remained rolling his majestic frame in his usual manner. Rolling his majestic frame. I don't know what that means. And at last I perceived him walk back into the town, and he disappeared. Sad. Utrecht seeming at first very dull to me, after the animated scenes of London, my spirits were grievously affected. And I wrote to Johnson a plaintive and desponding letter, to which he paid no regard. Afterwards, when I had acquired a firmer tone of mind, I wrote him a second letter, expressing much anxiety to hear from him. At length I received the following epistle, which was of important service to me, and I trust will be so to many others. And finally a letter again. It's been a while, like a week or so, since we've had a letter. A Mr. Boswell, à la Cour de l'Empereur, Utrecht. Dear Sir, you are not to think yourself forgotten or criminally neglected that you have had yet no letter from me. I love to see my friends, to hear from them, to talk to them, and to talk of them. But it is not without a considerable effort of resolution that I prevail upon myself to write. I would not, however, gratify my own indolence by the commission of any important duty or any office of real kindness. To tell you that I am or am not well, that I have or had not been in the country, that I drank your health in the room in which we sat last together, and that your acquaintance continued to speak of you with their former kindness, topics with which those letters are commonly filled, which are written only for the sake of writing, I seldom shall think worth communicating. But if I can have it in my power to calm any harassing disquiet, to excite any virtuous desire, to rectify any important opinion, or to fortify any generous resolution, you need not doubt but I shall at least wish to prefer the pleasure of gratifying a friend much less esteemed than yourself before the gloomy calm of idle vacancy. Whether I shall easily arrive at an exact punctuality of correspondence I cannot tell. I shall at present expect that you will receive this in return for two which I have had from you. The first, indeed, gave me an account so hopeless of the state of your mind that it hardly admitted or deserved an answer. By the second I was much more better pleased, and the pleasure will still be increased by such a narrative of the progress of your studies as may evince the continuance of an equal and rational application of your mind to some useful inquiry. You will perhaps wish to ask what study I would recommend. I shall not speak of theology, because it ought not to be considered as a question whether you shall endeavor to know the will of God. I shall therefore consider only such studies as we are at liberty to pursue or to neglect. And of these I know not how you will make a better choice than by studying the civil law, as your father advises, and the ancient languages, as you had determined for yourself. At least resolve, while you remain in any settled residence, to spend a certain number of hours every day amongst your books. The dissipation of thought of which you complain is nothing more than the vacillation of a mind suspended between different motives, and changing its direction as any motives gains or loses strength. If you can but kindle in your mind any strong desire, if you can but keep predominant any wish for some particular excellence or attainment, the gusts of imagination will break away without any effect upon your conduct, and commonly without any traces left upon the memory. There lurks, perhaps, in every human heart a desire of distinction which inclines every man first to hope and then to believe that nature has given him something peculiar to himself. This vanity makes one mind nurse aversion, and another actuate desires, till they rise by art much above their original state of power. And as affectation in time improves to habit, they at last tyrannize over him who at first encouraged them only for show. That's like fake it till you make it, I guess. Every desire is a viper in the bosom, who, while he was chill, was harmless. But when warmth gave him strength, exerted it in poison. You know a gentleman who, when first he set his foot in the gay world, all as he prepared himself to whirl in the vortex of pleasure, imagined a total indifference and universal negligence to be the most agreeable concomitants of youth, and the strongest indication of an airy temper and a quick apprehension. Vacant to every object and sensible of every impulse, he thought that all appearance of diligence would deduct something from the reputation of genius, and hoped that he should appear to attain, amidst all the ease of carelessness and all the tumult of diversion, that knowledge and those accomplishments which mortals of the common fabric obtain only by mute abstraction and solitary drudgery. He tried this scheme of life a while, was made weary of it by his sense in his virtue. He then wished to return to his studies, and finding long habits of idleness and pleasure harder to be cured than he expected, still willing to retain his claim to some extraordinary prerogatives, resolved the common consequences of irregularity into an unalterable decree of destiny, and concluded that nature had originally formed him incapable of rational employment. Let all such fancies, inclusive and destructive, be banished henceforward from your thoughts forever. Resolve and keep your resolution. Choose and pursue your choice. If you spend this day in study, you will find yourself still more able to study tomorrow. Not that you are to expect that you shall at once obtain a complete victory. Depravity is not very easily overcome. Resolution will sometimes relax, and diligence will sometimes be interrupted. But let no accidental surprise or deviation, whether short or long, dispose you to despondency. Consider these failings as incident to all mankind. Begin again where you left off, and endeavor to avoid the seducements that prevailed over you before. This, my dear Boswell, is advice which, perhaps, has been often given you, and given you without effect. But this advice, if you will not take from others, you must take from your own reflection, if you propose to do the duties of the station to which the bounty of Providence has called you. Let me have a long letter from you as soon as you can. I hope you continue your journal, and enrich it with many observations upon the country in which you reside. It will be a favor if you can get me any books in the Frisick language. Inquire how the poor are maintained in the 7 provinces. How the poor are maintained in the 7 provinces. I am, dear sir, your most affectionate servant, Sam Johnson, London, December 8th, 1763. I am sorry to say, to observe, this is Boswell, that neither in my own minutes nor in my letters to Johnson, which have been preserved by him, can I find any information how the poor are maintained in the 7 provinces. But I shall extract from one of my letters what I learned concerning the other subject of his curiosity. Quote from me, Boswell. I have made all possible inquiry with respect to the Frisick language, and find that it has been less cultivated than any other of the northern dialects, a certain proof of which is their deficiency of books. Of the old Frisick there are no remains, except some ancient laws preserved by Schotanus in his Burevij van die Herlied van Friesland, in his Historia Frischia. I have not yet been able to find these books. Professor Trotz, who formerly was of the University of Frankfurt in Friesland, and is at present preparing an edition of all the Frisick laws, gave me this information. Of the modern Frisick, of what is spoken by the Boers at this day, I have procured a specimen. It is Gisbert's Jaspix Rimeleri, which is the only book that they have. It is amazing that they have no translations of the Bible, no treatises of devotion, nor even any of the ballads and storybooks which are so agreeable to country people. You shall have Japix by the first convenient opportunity. I doubt not to pick up Schotanus. Meaner Trotz has promised me his assistance. I think that's it for today. Yes, because tomorrow will be a new year. Well, that was good. That letter was pretty nice. It was like a graduation speech. Maybe if I ever have to give a graduation speech, I'll just pilfer from that. Not bad, though. Anyway, until next time, bye from Boswell.